I was just patching a driveway. It's all it was supposed to be. The day started like any Thursday in late September. My alarm clock deciding to take a personal day. While my phone buzzed with the enthusiasm of a caffeinated bee, I'd fallen asleep on my couch again, still wearing yesterday's work clothes, with a half-empty bottle of root beer balanced precariously on my chest, and the TV stuck on some infomercial about revolutionary kitchen gadgets that promised to change my life for 3 easy payments of $19.99. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My back cracked in places I didn't know could crack as I hauled myself upright, immediately regretting my life choices and wondering if 34 was too young to feel this old. The coffee maker gurgled to life with the reluctant enthusiasm of a morning person forced to exist before 7 a.m. While I shuffled around my small kitchen, like a zombie searching for purpose, my phone had accumulated the usual collection of overnight chaos. A text from my sister Maya asking if I still had Dad's old drill set. A voicemail from Mrs. Patterson 3 blocks over about her garbage disposal making concerning whale sounds. And 2 missed calls from unknown numbers that were probably either telemarketers or people who'd found my number written on a bathroom wall next to for a good time. Call Liam. Liam Rodriguez, that's me. 34 years old, certified handyman, unofficial neighborhood problem solver, and professional procrastinator when it comes to fixing my own life. I've been running Rodriguez Repairs for 6 years now, ever since I got laid off from the construction company and decided that working for myself couldn't possibly be more stressful than working for someone else. I was wrong about that, but by the time I figured it out, I had business cards and a truck with my name on it, so I was committed. I grabbed my usual breakfast, a granola bar that claimed to be packed with energy but tasted like disappointment, with chocolate chips, and scrolled through my job requests on the app I used to manage my business. Most of it was the standard suburban drama: leaky faucets, squeaky hinges, ceiling fans that had developed opinions about which direction they wanted to spin. Then I saw it. Driveway repair needed ASAP. Concrete settled unevenly, creating safety. Hazard, located on Rosewood Drive. Flexible on timing, but hoping for quick resolution. The request was submitted at 6:23 a.m. by someone named Ilona Matthews. The address was in Willowbrook Heights, the kind of neighborhood where people had driveways worth repairing instead of just parking on whatever flat surface they could find, good pay, straightforward job, and close enough that I wouldn't spend half my morning in traffic, listening to radio DJs pretend to be funnier than they actually were. I accepted the job and sent my standard response: "Hi, I'm Liam from Rodriguez Repairs. I can swing by this morning to assess the driveway situation. I'll bring coffee if you've got the patience for my terrible jokes about concrete." The response came back faster than I expected. "Coffee sounds perfect. I'll be here all morning. Fair warning. The driveway is more of a geological disaster than a simple repair job. Also, your jokes can't be worse than my neighbor's daily updates about his prize-winning roses." I liked her immediately. Anyone who could acknowledge their own home repair disasters with humor was my kind of client. Plus, she seemed awake and functional before 8 a.m., which already put her ahead of most of the population in my book. I loaded my truck with the usual arsenal concrete patch. Tools, a level that I'd owned for 8 years and still didn't entirely. Trust, and my emergency backup coffee, because you never knew when a job was going to turn into an all-day affair. The morning was crisp and clear, with that particular quality of light that made everything look like it belonged in a real estate brochure. Willowbrook Heights was exactly what I expected. Tree-lined streets with names like Maple Vista and Oak Harbor. Houses that looked like they'd been designed by people who'd never met a bay window they didn't like. And lawns so perfect, they made me suspicious about what kind of fertilizer these people were using. Rosewood Drive curved gently through the neighborhood, like someone had drawn it with a ruler and then gotten bored halfway through. At the houses were all variations on the same theme: colonial revival, craftsman, that particular style of suburban architecture that screamed, with good credit and strong opinions about homeowners association regulations. Number 1247 was a pale yellow craftsman with white trim, a front porch that wrapped around the side of the house, and a driveway that looked like it had been through a small earthquake. The concrete had settled in chunks, creating a series of uneven platforms that turned what should have been a smooth path into something resembling a very boring obstacle course. But it wasn't the driveway that caught my attention first. It was the woman kneeling beside a flower bed, wearing gardening gloves and a paint-stained University of Oregon sweatshirt, methodically pulling weeds with the focused determination of someone who'd declared war on dandelions and intended to win. She had shoulder-length auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and even from 30 feet away, I could see she was talking to herself, or possibly to the plants, which in my experience was usually a sign of either exceptional gardening skills or a very interesting personality. A golden retriever lounged nearby, occasionally lifting his head to assess whether any of the weeds posed a threat worth barking at. Then, apparently deciding that vigilance was overrated, and returning to his very important nap. As I pulled into the driveway, carefully navigating the concrete minefield, she looked up. I got my first clear look at Ilona Matthews. She was probably in her late 40s, with the kind of face that suggested she'd lived a full life and found most of it amusing. Her eyes were the color of strong coffee, and when she smiled and waved, I noticed she had the kind of laugh lines that come from actually using them regularly. "You must be Liam," she called out, standing up and brushing dirt off her knees. "I'm Ilona. Welcome to my personal concrete nightmare." I stepped out of the truck and immediately understood what she meant. The driveway wasn't just uneven, it was aggressively uneven, like the earth underneath had decided to rearrange itself just to prove a point. "Well," I said, surveying the damage, "I've seen worse, though I'll admit not many." She laughed a real laugh, not the polite chuckle most clients gave my attempts at humor. That's either very reassuring or absolutely terrifying. A little bit of both, I admitted, already calculating materials and time in my head. But hey, at least it's not boring, and that's how it started. Just a driveway, a Thursday morning. And a woman who laughed at bad jokes about concrete. I had no idea that by the time the sun set, everything I thought I knew about taking simple jobs would be turned upside down. Sometimes, the most ordinary moments are just the calm before something extraordinary begins. We shook hands right there beside her geological disaster of a driveway. Her hands were warm and slightly calloused, not the soft hands of someone who hired people to do everything, but the hands of someone who'd spent time working in gardens, fixing things, actually living in her house instead of just existing in it. The golden retriever had roused himself from his strategic napping position to investigate me, sniffing my boots with the thoroughness of a customs agent. "That's Murphy," Ilona said, noticing my new canine inspector. "He's got strong opinions about contractors. Last month, he hid the plumber's wrench because apparently the guy didn't meet his professional standards." "Smart dog," I said, bending down to let Murphy sniff my hand. He seemed to approve, or at least decide I wasn't an immediate threat to. "The household security. What were his issues with the plumber?" "I think it was the crack situation," she replied. I must have looked confused because she quickly added, "The plumber's, not Murphy's." Though honestly, Murphy's opinions on appropriate work attire are probably more reasonable than most dress codes. I laughed. And something about the way she said it, matter if fact, but with this underlying current of humor, made me realize this wasn't going to be a typical quick assessment, tan quote kind of job. There was something about Ilona Matthews that made me want to stick around. Not just because she was clearly intelligent and funny, but because she had this quality that felt rare these days. She seemed genuinely present, like she was actually engaged with the world around her instead of just moving through it. "So," I said, pulling out my measuring tape and notebook, "tell me about this concrete situation. How long has it been doing its impression of tectonic plate movement?" She walked me over to the worst section where what used to be a smooth driveway now looked like someone had played Jenga with concrete slabs. "It started about 6 months ago. It's just a small crack near the garage. I figured it was normal settling, you know. Then winter happened, and apparently Frost has very strong opinions about structural integrity." I knelt down to examine the damage more closely. It was definitely more than just settling. The whole foundation had shifted, probably due to water, drainage issues, and the freeze-thaw cycle. As I measured and made notes, Ilona continued talking, and I found myself actually listening Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Instead of just waiting for her to finish so I could give my professional assessment. "I've been in this house for 3 years now," she said, leaning against the porch railing. "Bought it after my divorce was finalized. It was supposed to be my fresh start house, you know? It's a place where I figured out who I was when I wasn't half of a couple anymore." There was something in the way she said it. Not bitter, not sad, just honest, that made me look up from my measurements. "How's that working out?" "Well, I've learned that I'm the kind of person who talks to plants, buys too many books, and apparently attracts broken driveways," she said with a self-deprecating smile. "So I'd say it's been educational." Stood up, brushing concrete dust off my hands. "For what it's worth, talking to plants is supposed to help them grow, and broken driveways are fixable. Can't speak to the book situation that might be terminal." "Say that like it's a bad thing," she replied. "I prefer to think of it as aggressive literacy." As I continued my assessment, Ilona disappeared into the house and came back with 2 mugs of coffee that smelled like it had been made by someone who understood that coffee was a craft. It's not just a delivery system for caffeine. Why, she handed me one and settled onto the porch steps, Murphy positioning himself strategically between us like a furry chaperone. "Mind if I ask what you did before the fresh start?" I said, taking a sip. The coffee was excellent, strong but smooth, with just enough complexity to make me wonder if she'd roasted the beans herself. "I was a social worker for 15 years, she said. "Specialized in family counseling, crisis intervention, that sort of thing. Spent my days helping other people figure out their lives while mine slowly fell apart in ways I was too busy to notice. That sounds..." Paused, trying to find the right words. "Emotionally complicated." "That's a diplomatic way to put it," she laughed. "Turns out when you spend all day analyzing other people's relationships, you can completely miss the fact that your own husband has been having an emotional affair with his coworker for 2 years. The way she said it was matter of fact, but I caught the slight tightness around her eyes that suggested the wound was healed, but the scar was still tender. "I'm sorry, that's rough." "It was," she agreed. "But honestly, the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing that I'd been so focused on being the person I thought I should be, the helpful wife, the understanding partner, the woman who had her life together, that I'd forgotten to actually be myself." I found myself nodding. "I get that. I spent 5 years working construction, convinced I was building toward something. Then one day I got laid off and realized I'd been building someone else's dream the whole time." "Is that when you started your own business?" "More or less. Though started makes it sound more intentional than it was." "Really? I just started fixing things for neighbors because I needed money, and eventually someone suggested I should make it official." I gestured toward my truck with its slightly faded Rodriguez Repairs logo. 6 years later, here we are. "Do you like it, working for yourself?" I considered the question while I watched Murphy investigate a suspicious leaf. "Most days. It's terrifying and unpredictable, and some months I wonder if I should have just found another construction job. But there's something about showing up at someone's house when they're dealing with a problem and being able to actually fix it makes you feel useful, you know?" "I do know," she said softly. "That's why I loved social work, even when it was breaking my heart. There's something powerful about being the person someone calls when they need help." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, drinking our coffee and watching Murphy patrol the perimeter of the yard for threats to homeland security. The morning sun had warmed up enough that Ilona had pushed up the sleeves of her sweatshirt, and I noticed she had a small tattoo on her wrist, just a simple line drawing of a bird in flight.
"How long do you think the repair will take?"
she asked eventually. I looked back at the driveway, mentally calculating materials, labor, and the inevitable complications that always seem to arise with concrete work. Honestly, this is more than a patch job. We're looking at breaking out the damaged sections and pouring new concrete. It's probably 3 days, maybe 4 if the weather doesn't cooperate. That long? She didn't seem upset, just curious. "Could do a quick patch that would last maybe a year," I said. "But if you're planning to stay in this house long term, it's worth doing it right. Plus, we need to address the drainage issue that caused this in the first place, or we'll just be having this conversation again in a few years." She nodded thoughtfully. I'm definitely planning to stay. This house, it's the first place that's ever felt like mine, you know? Not ours, not his, just mine. There was something about the way she said it that made me understand this wasn't just about a driveway repair. It was about claiming space, about making a place that reflected who she was becoming instead of who she used to be. And we do. It right, I said. Fair warning, though. Having construction in your driveway for several days is going to be disruptive. Lots of noise, concrete trucks, general chaos. I think I can handle a little chaos, she said with a smile that suggested she'd handled much worse. Besides, Murphy loves construction vehicles, don't you, buddy? Murphy wagged his tail, apparently in full agreement with this assessment. As I packed up my measuring tools and started calculating materials, I found myself looking forward to coming back tomorrow more than I had looked forward to a job in months. There was something about Ilona Matthews, her easy laugh, her honest way of talking about difficult things, her obvious intelligence that made me want to do more than just fix her driveway. I wanted to stick around and see what other interesting thoughts came out of her head. The next morning, I arrived at Ilona's house with a truck full of concrete supplies and the kind of optimistic energy that only comes from drinking too much coffee on an empty stomach. The plan was simple. Break out the damaged sections, level the foundation, and pour new concrete. What I hadn't planned for was Ilona greeting me at the door with homemade blueberry muffins and the kind of smile that made me forget why. I'd been dreading the early start time. Fuel for the day, she said, handing me a muffin that was still warm. I figured if you're going to spend the next few days destroying and rebuilding my driveway, the least I can do is make sure you don't starve in the process. Murphy appeared. At her side, its tail wagging with the enthusiasm of someone who'd heard the word muffin and understood its implications for potential crumb distribution. He's hoping you're a messy eater, Ilona explained. Sorry to disappoint, I said, taking a bite. The muffin was incredible, not too sweet. With actual blueberries instead of those artificial blue pellets that some people tried to pass off as fruit. This is amazing. Do you bake often? Only when I'm procrastinating on something important, she admitted. Yesterday was avoiding a phone call with my lawyer about finalizing some property settlement details. Today, it's postponing the decision about whether to repaint the guest bedroom or just accept that seafoam green was a mistake. As I set up my equipment, Ilona settled onto the porch steps with her own coffee, apparently planning to supervise the destruction phase of the operation. Is it weird having someone watch you work, she asked. Depends on the someone, I said. Firing up the concrete saw, some people hover and offer helpful suggestions about how I should be doing my job differently. Others just enjoy the chaos. Which type are you? Probably a little of both, she said honestly. Fair warning, I have opinions about everything, but I'm usually wrong about construction-related topics. The morning flew by in a rhythm of breaking concrete, hauling debris, and intermittent conversation. During water breaks, Ilona would wander over to assess the progress, and somehow we'd end up talking about everything except the driveway. I learned that she'd grown up in a small town in Idaho, that she'd wanted to be a veterinarian until she realized she was too empathetic to handle putting animals down, and that her ex-husband used to complain that she cared more about other people's problems than their own relationship. He wasn't entirely wrong, she said, watching me level the foundation with more attention than the task probably warranted. I spent so much energy being the person everyone else needed me to be that I forgot to figure out who I actually was. Underneath all that helping, what made you realize that? I asked, adjusting the grade stakes. Therapy, mostly. Turns out when your marriage falls apart, all that training in family counseling doesn't automatically make you good at fixing your own life. She laughed, but there was something rueful in it. My therapist kept asking me what I wanted, and I kept giving her answers about what I thought I should want. It took me months to understand the difference. I straightened up, wiping sweat from my forehead. So what did you figure out you actually wanted? It's space to be messy, she said immediately. Space to make mistakes without someone analyzing my decision-making process. Space to eat ice cream for breakfast if I want to, or stay up too late reading. Or spend an entire Saturday reorganizing my bookshelf by color instead of author, because it makes me happy, even though it's completely impractical. Those don't sound like big asks. They weren't. That was the problem. I'd been so focused on being the perfect partner that I'd given up tiny freedoms I didn't even realize I missed until they were gone. She paused, watching Murphy chase a butterfly with optimistic determination. What about you? What made you realize construction wasn't your path? I considered the question while I mixed the first batch of concrete. Honestly. It was a Tuesday morning, and my foreman was screaming at the new guy for mixing concrete wrong. And I realized I'd been working construction for 5 years and had never once woken up excited about going to work. Not once. That's depressing. It was. But it was also clarifying. I kept thinking about my dad. He was a mechanic, worked on cars for 40 years. And he used to come home covered in grease, but talking about engines like they were puzzles he'd solved. I wanted that feeling, you know? The satisfaction of fixing something that was broken. And you get that with handyman work. Most days. There's something about showing up at someone's house when their life is a little chaotic because something's broken, and then leaving knowing you've actually made their day better. It's immediate and concrete, no pun intended. You can see the difference you've made? Alona nodded thoughtfully. That's what I loved about social work when it was working. Being the person someone called when everything felt impossible and helping them see that it wasn't actually impossible, just complicated. What made you stop? Burnout, mostly. 18 years of other people's crises takes a toll, especially when your own life is falling. They weren't. That was the problem. I'd been so focused on being the perfect partner that I'd given up tiny freedoms I didn't even realize I missed until they were gone. She paused, watching Murphy chase a butterfly with optimistic determination. What about you? What made you realize construction wasn't your path? I considered the question while I mixed the first batch of concrete. Honestly. It was a Tuesday morning, and my foreman was screaming at the new guy for mixing concrete wrong. And I realized I'd been working construction for 5 years and had never once woken up excited about going to work. Not once. That's depressing. It was. But it was also clarifying. I kept thinking about my dad. He was a mechanic, worked on cars for 40 years. And he used to come home covered in grease, but talking about engines like they were puzzles he'd solved. I wanted that feeling, you know? The satisfaction of fixing something that was broken. And you get that with handyman work. Most days. There's something about showing up at someone's house when their life is a little chaotic because something's broken, and then leaving knowing you've actually made their day better. It's immediate and concrete, no pun intended. You can see the difference you've made? Alona nodded thoughtfully. That's what I loved about social work when it was working. Being the person someone called when everything felt impossible and helping them see that it wasn't actually impossible, just complicated. What made you stop? Burnout, mostly. 18 years of other people's crises takes a toll, especially when your own life is falling apart and you're pretending it isn't. She picked up a small piece of broken concrete, turning it over in her hands. The final straw was this family I was working with, parents going through a nasty divorce, using their kids as weapons against each other. I spent months trying to help them figure out how to co-parent effectively, and then I went home to my own husband, who hadn't spoken to me in 3 days because I had forgotten to pick up his dry cleaning. Jesus. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was so good at seeing what other people needed, but I couldn't see that my own marriage had been over for years. We were just 2 people living in the same house, going through the motions because it was easier than admitting we'd grown into completely different people. How long were you married? 18 years? We got together in college, got married right after graduation, did everything according to the timeline we thought we were supposed to follow. House careers, talking about kids someday, but never quite getting around to it because there was always something else to focus on first. Do you regret not having kids? She was quiet for a long moment, watching me work. Sometimes, but honestly, I think we would have been terrible parents. Not because we're bad people, but because we never learned how to be good partners first. Kids deserve better than parents who are just coexisting. The afternoon sun was getting hot, and I suggested we break for lunch. Lona disappeared into the house and came back with sandwiches that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Actual turkey instead of processed lunch meat, avocado. It is, though. Most compliments are about how I look, or how helpful I am, or how well I handle other people's problems. Nobody ever notices that I'm actually listening. She finished her sandwich and leaned back against the porch railing. Funny, I spent so many years being the person everyone came to for advice, but I never felt like anyone was really paying attention to me as a person. Just as a function? That sounds lonely. It was. I didn't realize how lonely until I wasn't that person anymore. When I stopped being a wife and a counselor simultaneously, I had to figure out who I was when I wasn't needed for anything specific. She looked at me with those coffee-colored eyes. What about you? Do you ever feel like you're just a function instead of a person? The question caught me off guard with its directness. Yeah, actually, sometimes I feel like I'm just the guy people call when their stuff breaks, like my whole identity is tied up in being useful. Is that why you've never married? No. It was my turn to be surprised by her directness. How do you know I've never been married? No tan line where a wedding ring would be. You talk about your schedule like you only have to account to yourself. And you have the slightly bewildered air of someone who's never had to negotiate bathroom counter space with another person. I laughed. It's very observant and accurate. I've had long-term relationships, but they always seem to end the same way, with someone telling me I was emotionally unavailable or too focused on work or not ready for the next step. Were they right? Probably. I think I've been so focused on building something stable that I forgot relationships require you to be vulnerable, not just useful. Vulnerability is terrifying, Ilona agreed, but useful gets exhausting when it's all anyone sees in you. As the afternoon stretched on and we returned to work, I found myself thinking about what she'd said, about being seen as a person instead of a function, about the difference between being needed and being wanted, about the courage it took to rebuild your life. When everything you thought you knew about yourself turned out to be incomplete, by the time I packed up my tools for the day, the foundation was level and ready for concrete. Tomorrow, we'd pour the new driveway, and Ilona would have the fresh start she'd been building toward. But something told me this project was about more than just concrete. The concrete pour was scheduled for Friday morning, which meant Thursday. Was prep day final measurements? Setting forms? Making sure everything was level and ready for what would essentially be a one-shot deal. You don't get do-overs with concrete. Once it starts setting, you're committed to whatever decisions you've made. I arrived earlier than usual, partly because I wanted to double-check everything, and partly because I'd found myself looking forward to these mornings with Ilona more than I probably should have. The house was quiet when I pulled up, no sign of her in the front yard. But Murphy appeared at the window and gave me his usual tail-wagging assessment of my arrival. I was laying out the concrete forms when Ilona emerged from the house carrying 2 travel mugs and wearing a flannel shirt over jeans that looked like they'd seen actual work. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she had the slightly rumpled look of someone who'd been up early, maybe unable to sleep. "Thought you might need fortification," she said, handing me one of the mugs. "Today's the big day, right?" "Point of no return? It's one way to put it," I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Once we pour tomorrow, we're committed. No going back, no major adjustments. What you see is what you get." Sounds terrifying and exciting at the same time. Most worthwhile things are. We stood there for a moment, sipping coffee and looking at the prepared foundation. I'd spent 2 days breaking out the old concrete, leveling the base, installing proper drainage, and setting the forms. It looked professional, ready, like the foundation for something that would last. "Can I ask you something?" Ilona said suddenly, her voice carrying a note I hadn't heard before. Not quite nervous, but careful, like she was approaching something fragile. "Sure." She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup, like it might contain the right words. "Yesterday, when we were talking about being seen as people instead of functions, it got me thinking about something." I waited, sensing this was important. "The thing is," she continued, "I've been thinking about it all night, actually. About what you said, about feeling like you're just the guy people call when their stuff breaks. And I realized that for the first time in God, maybe ever, I'm talking to someone who sees me as more than just the woman who fixes other people's problems. You are more than that. But how do you know that? We've known each other for 3 days." It was a fair question, and I found myself really considering it instead of just giving an automatic response. I guess because you talk about things like they matter to you personally, not just professionally. And you listen like you're actually interested in the answers, not just waiting for your turn to give advice, and ... I paused, trying to articulate something I'd been feeling but hadn't named. And you seem like you're actually present in your own life now instead of just managing everyone else's. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. That's exactly what I mean. You see things about me that I'm still figuring out about myself. Is that good or bad? I think it's terrifying, she said honestly, but also necessary. Maybe? I was adjusting one of the forms, trying to look busy, while processing what felt like the beginning of a conversation that might change things between us. Terrifying how? Because I spent 18 years with someone who never saw me the way you seemed to after 3 days? And that makes me wonder ... She trailed off, shaking her head. God, this is going to sound crazy. Try me. She took a deep breath, and when she looked at me, there was something vulnerable and brave in her expression that made my chest tight. Would you stay with me, even if I'm 49? I'm not joking. The question hit me like a physical thing. I straightened up so fast I nearly knocked over the level, and for a moment I could only stare at her, not because the question was inappropriate or unwelcome, but because it was so honest, so direct, so completely free of the games people usually played around attraction and possibility. I mean, she added quickly, color rising in her cheeks. Not necessarily romantically, not necessarily anything specific. I keep thinking about what you said about wanting to feel valued instead of just useful. And I realize that's exactly what I want to. To be wanted for who I am, not for what I can do or how well I can take care of other people's needs. I set down my tools and really looked at her. She wasn't being coy or fishing for compliments. She was asking a genuine question about whether someone could want her company, her thoughts, her presence, even though she was 49 and divorced, and came with a complicated history of putting everyone else's needs before her own. Ilona, I said carefully, are you asking if I think you're too old for someone to want to be with you? I'm asking if you think I'm too old for you to want to be with me. The directness of it took my breath away. No hints, no subtle probing, no testing the waters. Just a straight question that demanded an honest answer. The age thing. ... I started, then stopped, realizing I needed to think about this properly. The age thing isn't what would scare me. What would scare you? How much I already look forward to seeing you every morning, how much I like the way you think about things, how much I want to know what you're going to say next. I paused, surprised by my own honesty. I've been doing this job for 6 years, and I've never once hoped a project would take longer than necessary. Until this week. She was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. So the answer is yes, even though I'm 49 and come with a ridiculous amount of emotional baggage and a tendency to overthink everything, especially because of those things I said and realized I meant it completely. No? You're not too old, Ilona. You're not too complicated. You're not to anything except maybe too honest for most people to handle, and you can handle it. I looked at her standing there in her work clothes, holding her coffee mug like a shield, asking the kind of question that most people spent months building up to. I'd like to try. The smile that spread across her face was different from any I'd seen before. Not the polite social worker smile or the self-deprecating humor smile, but something genuine and relieved and maybe a little amazed. Really? Though I should probably warn you that I'm 34 and come with my own. It's a ridiculous amount of emotional baggage and a tendency to communicate primarily through home improvement metaphors. She laughed, a real laugh that seemed to come from somewhere, deep and previously untapped. I think I can handle that. We stood there grinning at each other like teenagers who'd just figured out the feeling was mutual, until Murphy appeared between us and reminded us that the world continued to exist beyond this moment. So, I said, suddenly aware that I was still holding a level and we were standing in what would soon be her new driveway. What happens now? Now we pour concrete, she said practically, and then we figure out what comes after that. Good plan, besides. She added with a smile that made my heart do something complicated. I've got all day tomorrow to watch you work. Might as well make it interesting. As I went back to checking the forms, I realized that everything had changed, and nothing had changed. We still had a driveway to pour, concrete that wouldn't wait for anyone's personal revelations, and a job that needed to be done right. But now, we also had something else, the beginning of an answer to a question that had taken incredible courage to ask. The concrete truck arrived at 7 a.m. sharp on Friday, rumbling down Rosewood Drive like a mechanical dinosaur. I'd been there since 6:30, nervous energy disguised as productivity. Yesterday's conversation had left me feeling like I was standing on the edge of something important, and today we were literally pouring the foundation for whatever came next. Ilona emerged wearing work boots and a flannel shirt, looking ready to help rather than supervise. She handed me coffee and a bagel wrapped in cloth. Figured you'd need sustenance for the big event. Murphy was vibrating with excitement as Earl, the concrete truck driver I'd worked with before, set up the chute. That's when our first secondary character made her appearance. Good Lord, what time did you people start making all this noise? A woman in her 70s stood on the neighboring porch in a bathrobe and fuzzy slippers, holding a coffee mug like a weapon. Steel gray hair and curlers, expression of profound irritation. Mrs. Hendricks, Ilona called with practiced diplomacy. I'm so sorry about the early start. We wanted to get the concrete poured before it got too hot. In my day, construction started at civilized hours, Mrs. Hendricks replied, though her tone suggested she was more interested in being heard than solved. And contractors wore appropriate attire. Earl and I exchanged confused looks. We were both perfectly appropriately dressed. We'll keep the noise to a minimum, I called over. See that you do. Some of us remember when people had consideration for others. Lonely, Ilona said quietly after Mrs. Hendricks disappeared. Her husband died 2 years ago. Kids live across the country. She complains because it's the only way she gets to talk to people. That's surprisingly compassionate. Occupational hazard. 15 years of crisis counseling, you start seeing pain underneath difficult behavior. Our second character arrived on an expensive bike, a young man in Lycra who couldn't have been more than 25, wearing a helmet with more vents than actual helmet. Excuse me? Are you pouring a new driveway? He called out. That's the plan, I replied. Cool. Derek. I live 3 houses down, civil engineering student. I've never seen a residential concrete pour. Mind if I watch? Derek provided running commentary like a nature documentary narrator. It's fascinating how the aggregate settles. Look at the surface work, bringing the cream to the top. You really study this stuff, I said, impressed. Writing my thesis on sustainable concrete alternatives. Traditional Portland cement is responsible for 8% of global CO2 emissions. Our third character arrived in scrubs, driving a Honda Civic. A woman in her 40s with a nurse's Do It With Compassion bumper sticker. Ilona. I saw the concrete truck. Is this the driveway project? She called, jogging over after parking. Hey, Carmen. This is Liam, the contractor. Liam, Carmen's a nurse. At Children's Hospital, and my workout buddy. Carmen assessed me with the quick, accurate gaze of someone who evaluated people professionally. So you're responsible for Ilona's mysteriously good mood this week. We're figuring it out, Ilona said when Derek asked if we were dating. The best kind? Carmen approved. The figuring it out stage lets you discover the good stuff without pressure. Mrs. Hendricks reappeared, drawn by multiple conversations. Are you having a party? Some of us are trying to enjoy morning coffee in peace. Would you like to watch? Ilona surprised everyone by asking. It's actually interesting. I suppose I could observe, from an educational standpoint. Soon we had an impromptu audience, Derek providing technical commentary, Carmen asking practical questions, Mrs. Hendricks offering opinions about everything from technique to the moral implications of Friday. Morning home improvement. In my day. Couples courted for months before making major property decisions together, Mrs. Hendricks announced. We're not making property decisions together, Ilona protested. It's fixing my driveway. Same thing, Mrs. Hendricks replied confidently. A man doesn't put this much care into a woman's concrete unless he's planning to stick around long enough to see it cure properly. Earl grinned up from his work. Lady's got a point. I can tell when a contractor's trying to impress someone. The driveway looked perfect by Saturday morning. Smooth, level, cured enough to walk on carefully. I'd come by early to check on it. Partly professional pride, and partly because I wasn't ready for this job to be officially finished. Ilona was. Already outside with Murphy, both staring at the new concrete like it might disappear. "It's beautiful," she said. "I keep wanting to touch it, but I know that's not smart yet. Give it another day before driving, but walking's fine." I ran my hand along the smooth surface. It turned out better than expected. Better how? More ... permanent, I guess. She understood without explanation. We were both learning that some things felt different when you cared about them lasting. We were discussing drainage when a silver sedan pulled up across the street. Not unusual in suburbia, except it didn't belong to anyone I'd seen, and the driver just sat there, engine running. Apparently content to observe rather than visit. "Friend of yours?" I asked. Ilona followed my gaze, and something shifted in her expression. Not panic, but careful attention that suggested she'd been expecting this. "No, I don't think so." The car sat there 10 minutes while we pretended to discuss expansion joints. Eventually it drove away slowly, like the driver wanted a good look at the house, driveway, and us. "Ilona, is there something I should know?" Watched where the sedan had disappeared? Maybe. I'm probably being paranoid, but my divorce wasn't exactly amicable. There were financial disagreements that got ugly. My ex-husband had business partners who weren't thrilled about the settlement terms. "What kind of business partners?" "The kind who think legal proceedings are optional when you have other persuasion methods." She tried to look casual but didn't succeed. I may have understated. My emotional baggage complexity. Mrs. Hendricks appeared, marching across the yard with determined purpose. "Who was in the silver car?" she demanded. "I've watched this neighborhood 37 years.
Ow.
I know every vehicle that belongs here. That one doesn't." "We were wondering..." "The same thing," I said. "They sat there long enough to memorize license plates. In my day, if you wanted to visit someone, you knocked like a civilized person." Derek appeared from his morning bike ride, breathless and still helmeted. "Did you see that car? It was parked at my street's end for 20 minutes before coming here. The driver was taking pictures with a long lens." Ilona went very still. "Pictures? Yeah, professional camera. I thought maybe city assessments, but no official markings." Mrs. Hendricks crossed her arms, shifting into neighborhood watch mode. "That's surveillance behavior. I've seen enough procedurals to recognize reconnaissance. It's probably nothing," Ilona said unconvincingly. "Honey," Mrs. Hendricks said gently, "when a woman says probably nothing while looking like she's seen a ghost, it's definitely something." Carmen's Civic pulled up, and she emerged with post-shift energy, immediately reading our group dynamics. "With nurse assessment skills? What happened?" "Someone was watching the house," Derek explained, "taking telephoto pictures." Carmen's expression sharpened. "Ilona, is this about what we discussed last month? Your ex situation? Maybe I thought it was over. The lawyer said everything was settled." "What exactly was settled?" I asked, feeling like I was missing crucial information. Ilona looked around. "Our small group," and made a decision. My ex-husband was involved in business deals that weren't entirely legal. When we divorced, I ended up with information certain people would prefer stayed private. The settlement included confidentiality agreements, but also about leaving me alone, and someone's not keeping their end, Carmen asked. "Maybe they're checking that I'm keeping mine," Mrs. Hendricks snorted. "People who send photographers aren't trusting agreements. They're buying insurance policies."
How long have you been working here?
Mrs. Hendricks asked me. "This was supposed to be my last day." "Well, it's not anymore. Ilona needs people who care about her safety around, and you've been making moon eyes all week anyway. Might as well be useful." "I can take care of myself," Ilona said, looking at me like she was asking a question. "I know you can, but you don't have to." "From a statistical standpoint," Derek said, "random surveillance immediately following home improvement completion has very low probability. This is almost certainly related to your ex's involvement." "That's reassuring," Ilona said dryly. "Actually, it is," Mrs. Hendricks said. "Better known devils than unknown ones." "Now we know what we're dealing with." "We," Ilona asked. "Dear you. Live in this neighborhood now. It makes you family, whether you like it or not. And family protects family." By Sunday evening, we'd seen the silver sedan twice more. Once at the coffee shop on Maple Street where Derek spotted it getting smoothies. The second time driving past during dinner when Mrs. Hendricks was strategically watering flower beds. "This is escalating," Carmen said, settling into Alona's porch chair with wine that looked medicinal after her shift. "I've worked emergency rooms long enough to know coincidence from pattern." We'd gathered for Mrs. Hendricks' strategic planning session, really an impromptu neighborhood watch meeting with higher stakes. Derek brought his laptop and observation notes. Mrs. Hendricks brought binoculars and 37 years of neighborhood intelligence. I brought tools, though I wasn't sure what I planned to fix. "Pattern's definitely deliberate," Derek said, consulting notes seriously. 3 appearances, different times, different locations, within 4-block radius. They're mapping. Ilona's routine. "What routine could they be mapping?" asked. "She works from home, grocery shops, walks Murphy. Not exactly high-stakes material, unless they're looking for something else," Ilona said quietly. "Or someone else. What do you mean?" Carmen asked. Ilona stared at her wine like it held answers. "When Marcus and I divorced, files went missing from his office. Financial records, business correspondence that would have been ... in wrong hands. Define problematic," Mrs. Hendricks said bluntly. "The kind that becomes federal investigations and very long prison sentences." "Did you take them?" Derek asked. "Didn't have to." Marcus was sloppy with digital security.
Cleaning
Out our shared computer before divorce finalization, I found backup files of everything. Emails, financial transfers, contact lists for people definitely not running legitimate businesses, and you kept copies. My lawyer said they might be useful leverage if Marcus fought settlement terms. Insurance, basically. Smart lawyer, Mrs. Hendricks approved. Thing is, Marcus's partners probably assumed those files disappeared with the divorce. If they're suddenly concerned, I might still have them, and they want to ensure you don't," Carmen finished. "Or can't use them," Derek added, immediately regretting saying it aloud. The weight settled over us. This wasn't just surveillance anymore. This was about people with serious reasons to want Ilona gone and serious resources to make it happen. "Okay," I said, surprising myself with calmness. "What do we do?" Mrs. Hendricks confirmed before Ilona could object. "Your family now? Family protects family?" "Document everything first," Derek said, typing already. "Times, locations. License plates. Build a case proving this isn't random." "Already doing that," Mrs. Hendricks said, producing a notebook covered in precise handwriting. "Saturday, 9:47 a.m. Silver sedan, Washington plates, beginning B7 something. Sunday, 2:15 p.m. Same vehicle, sunglasses, and baseball cap. Sunday, 6:30 p.m. Different driver?" "Different driver?" Carmen asked. "Definitely. First one, older, gray hair. Second, younger, broader shoulders. They're taking shifts." "Very thorough surveillance for people just checking up," I observed. "Exactly. This organization level suggests specific planning." "Question is, what and when," Carmen said. Ilona looked at each of us. "You realize this isn't your problem? I can handle this myself. Call lawyers, contact police, figure out arrangements." "Arrangements?" Mrs. Hendricks asked sharply. "Maybe time to move again. Start over elsewhere." "Absolutely not," I said vehemently. "You just built a life here. Friends, a house you love, community that cares. You're not running because criminals think they can intimidate you." "Liam's right," Carmen agreed. "Running teaches them threats work. Doesn't actually make you safer. Unless if they're this organized, they'll probably follow wherever you go." Derek added pragmatically. "Better dealing with it here where you have support." "And where we know terrain," Mrs. Hendricks added, with strategic thinking that somehow sounded reasonable. Ilona looked around. Neighbors turned protection detail. Contractor supposed to finish and leave. Dog chasing his tail in blissful ignorance. "You're all insane, probably," Carmen agreed cheerfully. "But insane together makes it more fun. So what's the actual plan?" "First, understand who we're dealing with," Derek said. "Ilona, do you still have those files?" "Some. Gave originals to my lawyer. Kept digital copies of important stuff." "Good. We need to understand your actual leverage and what these people think you might do." "Second, Better security, Mrs. Hendricks said. I'm tracking vehicles, but we need cameras, lighting, quick communication if something happens.
I can.
Handle tech, Derek offered. Engineering department owes me favors. Sophisticated monitoring without looking obvious. Third, ensure Alona's never alone when vulnerable, Carmen said. Walking Murphy, shopping, coming and going. I can't ask you to reorganize lives around my problems. You're not asking, I said. We're volunteering. There's a difference. Would you do this for someone you barely know? Mrs. Hendricks patted Alona's hand gently. Honey, I've lived here 37 years, watched dozens come and go. Most were just passing through. But you're different. You planted flowers, learned names, wave when you see me. You make this feel like community instead of just houses. Plus, you make really good coffee, Carmen grinned. My caffeine supply has problems with me. Logically, helping you is more interesting than fluid dynamics homework, Derek added seriously. You asked if I'd stay with you, even if you're 49, I said. Here's your answer. I'm staying. We're all staying. For the first time since surveillance started, Ilona smiled genuinely. Okay, but if this goes badly, I'm buying everyone excellent life insurance. Deal, Mrs. Hendricks said promptly. Now let's make some criminals very sorry they messed with our neighborhood. It was Tuesday night when everything changed. Derek's surveillance system had been in place for 24 hours. Discrete cameras positioned to monitor all approaches to Ilona's house. Motion sensors that would alert his phone if anyone got too close, and a communication system that connected. All of us through a group text he'd named Rosewood Defense Squad, which Mrs. Hendricks had immediately declared unnecessarily dramatic, but functionally adequate. I was staying in Ilona's guest room, officially to help monitor the security system, but really because none of us wanted her alone in the house overnight. We'd been taking shifts, Carmen covering the day shift when she wasn't at the hospital, Mrs. Hendricks maintaining vigilant watch from her front window during evening hours, and me handling nights. It should have felt awkward, this sudden domestic intimacy with someone I'd known for barely a week. Instead, it felt natural in a way that surprised me. Ilona made coffee in the morning and left it in a thermos by my bedside. I fixed the squeaky bathroom door and adjusted the temperature on her water heater without being asked. We moved around each other in her kitchen with the easy rhythm of people who'd been sharing space for years instead of days. But underneath the domestic comfort, I could see the stress wearing on her. She wasn't sleeping well. I could hear her. Moving around the house at night, checking locks, looking out windows. During the day, she jumped at unexpected sounds and constantly scanned the street when we were outside. The woman who'd bravely asked me to stay with her was slowly disappearing under the weight of feeling hunted Tuesday night. It came to a head. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of Derek's motion sensor alert pinging on my phone. The text message was simple. Perimeter breach. Backyard. Single individual. I was out of bed and moving before I was fully awake, grabbing the baseball bat Ilona kept by the front door and heading toward the back of the house. What I found wasn't an intruder trying to break in. It was Ilona sitting on her back porch. Steps in her pajamas and a robe, staring into the darkness with Murphy pressed against her side. Hey, I said softly, not wanting to startle her. Derek's sensors picked up movement back here. That was probably me, she said without turning around. I'd been out here for about an hour. Sat down beside her on the steps. Close enough to offer comfort, but not so close that I was crowding her space. Couldn't sleep? I keep thinking about what Derek said, about them mapping my routine, planning something specific. She was quiet for a moment, absently stroking Murphy's ears. I keep wondering if this is how it ends. How what ends? This, she gestured vaguely at the house, the yard, the life she'd built. 3 years of rebuilding myself, of figuring out who I am when I'm not afraid all the time. And now, I'm right back where I started, scared looking over my shoulder, waiting for someone else to decide what happens to my life. There was something broken in her voice that I'd never heard before, not even when she'd told me about her divorce or her ex-husband's criminal associates. This was deeper than fear. This was the sound of someone whose faith in her own ability to create safety had been shattered. Ilona, I said carefully, you're not the same person who left that marriage 3 years ago. How do you know that? Because 3 years ago you would have handled this alone. You would have packed up, moved away, started over somewhere else. Without telling anyone what was happening or asking for help. I turned to face her. But this time, you let us in. You trusted us enough to tell us the truth, and you're letting us help instead of running away. Maybe that was a mistake, she said quietly. Maybe I'm putting all of you in danger for no reason. Maybe I should just give them what they want. Which is what, the files? All of it. Let them have the evidence and go back to pretending none of it ever happened? I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about what that would mean. And then what? You spend the rest of your life knowing that you let criminals intimidate you into silence. That you had the power to hold them accountable and chose not to use it. At least I'd be alive to have a rest of my life. Would you, though? Really be living? Or would you just be existing? Because the woman I've gotten to know this week, the one who plants flowers and makes her own bread and asks impossible questions about staying with someone even when you're 49, that woman doesn't give up her power to make criminals feel safer. She was crying now, quietly, the kind of tears that come from exhaustion and fear and the overwhelming weight of having to be strong for too long. I'm so tired, Liam, she whispered. I'm tired of being brave. I'm tired of starting over. I'm tired of feeling like I can't trust that good things will last. I put my arm around her shoulders. She leaned into me like she'd been holding herself upright through sheer force of will and finally had permission to rest. You don't have to be brave all the time, I said into her hair. That's what the rest of us are here for. But what if this doesn't work? What if they decide that threats aren't enough? What if something happens to you or Mrs. Hendricks or Derek or Carmen because I was too stubborn to just disappear quietly and we deal with it together? But Alona, you can't make decisions based on what criminals might do. You can't let fear of hypothetical consequences stop you from living the life you've built. What if I've forgotten how to do that? What if I've been afraid for so long that I don't remember what it feels like to just ... trust that things will be okay? I tightened, my arms around her, feeling the weight of everything she'd been carrying alone. Then we'll figure it out together. One day at a time, one decision at a time. You don't have to have all the answers right now. We sat there in the darkness for a long time, listening to the night sounds of the neighborhood, distant traffic, a neighbor's air conditioning unit cycling on and off, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Normal sounds from a normal world that felt very far away from surveillance and criminal threats and the weight of having to choose between safety and justice. Liam, she said finally, her voice steadier than it had been all evening. Yeah. When? I asked you if you'd stay with me, even if I'm 49. I wasn't just talking about age. I was asking if you'd stay with me, even if I come with all of this. The fear, the complications, the possibility that caring about me might put you in danger. I was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer honestly. 3 weeks ago, someone had told me I'd be sitting in a backyard at 2 a.m. planning security strategies to protect a woman I'd known for a week. I would have said they were crazy. And now I'm realizing that some things are worth the risk. You're worth the risk. She turned to look at me in the dim light from the house. Even if this gets worse before it gets better. Especially then, because running away doesn't solve anything and giving up doesn't make you safer. It just makes you smaller. I brushed a tear from her cheek. Besides, you're not alone in this anymore. You've got a neighborhood defense squad that includes a nurse with excellent emergency skills, an engineering student with access to sophisticated surveillance equipment, and a 70-year-old woman who's apparently been training for this moment her entire life. For the first time all evening, Ilona smiled. When you put it that way, we sound pretty formidable. We are, I said, and realized I believed it completely. And tomorrow we're going to prove it. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Mrs. Hendricks' Bridge Club. Ladies, she announced at our Wednesday morning strategy meeting, meet Dolores Zimmerman, retired FBI forensic accountant, and Patricia Walsh, former district attorney's office investigator. 2 women in their 70s sat in Ilona's living room, looking like they'd come for tea and cookies but carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of people who'd spent decades pursuing criminals. Eleanor filled us in on your situation, Dolores said, her voice crisp and professional. We'd like to take a look at those files you mentioned. You would? Ilona asked, clearly not sure whether to feel relieved or concerned about the rapid expansion of people involved in her problems. "Honey," Patricia said with a smile that had probably terrified defense attorneys for 30 years, "we didn't retire from law enforcement because we got tired of putting bad guys away. We retired because we got tired of bureaucracy." Sounds much more interesting. Derek set up his laptop while Alona retrieved her encrypted files. Within an hour, Dolores and Patricia had identified 3 separate federal crimes and 2 ongoing FBI investigations that Alona's evidence could support. "The good news," Dolores said, printing out contact information for federal prosecutors, "is that you're not just a potential witness, you're a key to solving cases they've been working on for years." "The better news," Patricia added, "is that once you're officially cooperating with federal law enforcement, these clowns watching your house become very stupid criminals who are interfering with a federal investigation." "How long does that take?" Carmen asked. "About 4 hours, if we make the right phone calls," Dolores said. Already reaching for her cell phone, Mrs. Hendricks beamed with pride. "I told you girls that Bridge Club networking would come in handy someday." By Thursday afternoon, the silver sedan had been replaced by a discreet black SUV with federal plates. Agent Sarah Chen, no relation to anyone Alona had ever heard of, she assured us, explained that they'd been tracking Marcus's organization for 2 years. "Your evidence fills in gaps we didn't even know we had," Agent Chen said. "We can move forward with indictments immediately." "What about Alona's safety?" I asked. "She need to testify? But these people are smart enough to know that harming a federal witness guarantees life sentences instead of possible plea deals. The surveillance will stop, has already stopped actually. We picked up 3 people this morning." Derek looked slightly disappointed. "So we don't need the defense squad anymore." "Oh, you absolutely do," Agent Chen said with amusement. "Not for protection from criminals, but because Ms. Matthews is going to need friends when this goes to trial. Federal cases take months, sometimes years. You'll want your support system intact." Mrs. Hendricks nodded approvingly. We weren't planning to go anywhere anyway. That evening, we gathered on Alona's new driveway for what Carmen declared an impromptu block party. Derek brought his guitar. Mrs. Hendricks contributed a casserole that was surprisingly good. And Patricia and Dolores stayed for dinner, regaling us with stories from their law enforcement days. "You know," Alona said to me as we watched our unlikely group of protectors become an even more unlikely group of friends. 3 weeks ago, I was just a divorced social worker with a broken driveway. And now? Now I'm a key federal witness with a perfect driveway and the strangest, most wonderful chosen family I've ever had." Murphy barked once, as if agreeing with this assessment, then went back to begging Derek for guitar-playing treats. "Plus," I added, "you've got a contractor who's apparently planning to stick around indefinitely." She smiled, leaning against me as the sun set over Rosewood Drive. Best home improvement project ever. 2 weeks after the federal agents had wrapped up their investigation and the neighborhood had returned to its normal rhythm of lawn care and casual gossip, Alona and I found ourselves sitting on her back porch with morning coffee, watching Murphy attempt to negotiate a peace treaty with a particularly stubborn squirrel. "So," she said, not looking at me, but focusing intently on Murphy's diplomatic efforts, "we should probably talk about what happens next." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've been staying in my guest room for 3 weeks now. Officially, the security threat is over. Your driveway repair job was finished ages ago. At some point, people are going to start wondering if you actually have your own place or if you've just moved in permanently." I set down my coffee mug and really looked at her. There was something carefully casual in the way she'd said it, like she was trying to give me an easy exit if I wanted one. "Do you want me to leave? That's not what I'm asking." "Then what are you asking?" She was quiet for a long moment, watching the squirrel make what appeared to be a counteroffer, involving territorial rights to the bird feeder. "I'm asking what we're doing here, Liam, because 3 weeks ago you asked me if I'd stay with you even if I'm 49. You said yes. But that was in the middle of crisis mode, when everything was heightened and dramatic and we were all playing roles in some kind of suburban thriller. And now it's just ... normal life. Morning coffee and grocery shopping and you fixing things around the house that I didn't even know were broken. I keep wondering if this is what you actually want, or if you're just too polite to tell." me that the emergency is over and you'd like your regular life back. I understood what she was really asking. In crisis, people bond intensely, make commitments that feel permanent in the moment, but might not survive the return to ordinary life. She was giving me space to acknowledge that what had felt profound and lasting might have just been adrenaline and proximity. Can I tell you something? I said. Always. Yesterday morning, I woke up before my alarm and lay there for about 10 minutes listening to you make coffee downstairs. And I realized that the sound of you moving around the kitchen, humming a song I didn't recognize, was the most peaceful sound I'd ever heard. She turned to look at me then, something cautious and hopeful in her expression. Last week I continued when you were at your lawyer's office going over testimony preparation. I spent 4 hours replacing the weather stripping around your windows. Not because you asked me to, not because it was an emergency, but because I wanted your house to be more comfortable and energy efficient. That's very practical. That's not the point. The point is that I've never cared about someone else's weather stripping before. I've never wanted to make someone else's space better just because it would make them happy. She smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her all morning. So you're saying you want to stay because of my windows? I'm saying I want to stay. Because somewhere in the middle of all this chaos, you became home to me. Not the house, not the neighborhood, not even the community we accidentally built. You, even though I'm 49 and come with ongoing federal court dates and a tendency to overthink everything, especially because of those things, because you're brave enough to do the right thing even when it's dangerous, because you think deeply about things that matter, because you make the best coffee I've ever had and you know how to ask the questions that cut straight to the truth. And because I have excellent weather stripping needs. That too, I said, laughing. Though honestly, your entire house has become my favorite home improvement project. What kind of project? It's the kind where the goal isn't to fix something that's broken, but to build something that lasts? She was quiet for a moment, considering this. So what does that look like, practically speaking? Because I don't want to assume anything about timelines or expectations or... Lona, I interrupted gently. Are you asking me to move in with you officially? I'm asking if you want to. There's a difference. I want to, I said without hesitation. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're the first person I'll see. I want to fix things in this house, not because it's my job, but because it's our home. I want to figure out what it looks like. To build a life with someone, instead of just managing my own life in parallel with theirs. What about your apartment? My lease is up next month anyway. Honestly, I haven't spent a night there since this whole thing started. I think my neighbors are starting to wonder if I moved away without telling anyone. So we're really doing this, at our age, after knowing each other for 3 weeks. We're really doing this? Because sometimes the right thing is obvious, even when the timing seems crazy. I reached over and took her hand. Besides, we've already survived a federal investigation together. After that, cohabitation should be easy, she laughed, interlacing our fingers. You know, Mrs. Hendricks is going to take full credit for this development. She should. Without her bridge club connections, we might still be running our own surveillance operation.
True.
And Derek's going to want to install smart home automation throughout the entire house. I can live with that. Carmen's going to want to throw us a housewarming party. Also acceptable. She squeezed my hand. You know what the best part is? What? We don't have to figure it all out today. We can just start with tomorrow morning's coffee and see how it goes. Perfect, I said. One day at a time, one decision at a time. One perfectly installed piece of weather stripping at a time. Murphy barked once, apparently having reached a successful accord with the squirrel, then trotted over to supervise. Our relationship negotiation with the serious attention of someone who understood that his humans were making important decisions about pack dynamics. I think Murphy approves, Ilona said. Good, I replied. It's excellent security, and I was hoping he'd let me stay. 3 months later, Rosewood Drive had settled into a new rhythm that somehow felt like it had always existed. My truck was permanently parked in Ilona's driveway, our driveway, and my tools migrated from the guest room to the garage she'd helped me. Organized with the efficiency of someone who understood that everything needed a designated place. Mrs. Hendricks had indeed taken full credit for the successful match, though she'd expanded her claims to include Derek's engineering expertise. Carmen's relationship counseling skills, and her own bridge club's federal law enforcement connections. I've been orchestrating neighborhood romances for decades. She announced to anyone who would listen, though this one required more FBI involvement than usual. Derek had graduated to unofficial neighborhood tech consultant, installing smart home systems throughout the block with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found his calling. His doorbell camera network had evolved into what he now called the Rosewood Early Warning System, though mostly it just documented Mrs. Hendricks' daily surveillance walks and Murphy's ongoing territorial disputes with various squirrels. Carmen had become our unofficial social coordinator, organizing monthly block parties that somehow always ended up in our backyard. "You two have the best space for entertaining," she'd say, though I suspected it was really because Alona made better food than anyone else on the street, and I'd built a fire pit that had become the neighborhood gathering spot. The federal trial had concluded the week before with convictions on all counts. Ilona's testimony had been key to securing justice for crimes that had affected dozens of families. And Agent Chen had personally thanked her for her courage in coming forward. "People like you make this job worthwhile," she'd said, and I could see how much that validation meant to Ilona after years of feeling like her ex-husband's chaos had defined her life. "You know what's strange?" Ilona said one Saturday morning. As we worked together in the garden, she'd expanded into the backyard. She was planting herbs while I installed the raised bed frames Derek had designed, using sustainable materials he'd sourced through his university connections. "What's that?" Spent so many years thinking that starting over meant leaving everything behind and rebuilding completely from scratch. But this doesn't feel like starting over. It feels like growing into something that was always supposed to happen. I looked around at the life we'd built together, the garden beds where she grew vegetables and herbs for the elaborate meals she loved cooking, the workshop I'd set up in the garage where I built furniture for friends and neighbors, the back porch where we spent evenings planning home improvements and listening to Derek practice guitar. "Maybe that's because you weren't actually starting from nothing," I said. "You'd already built the foundation, the courage to leave what wasn't, working the wisdom to recognize what you actually wanted, the openness to let people help when you needed it. You just needed the right circumstances to build on top of that foundation. And the right contractor? Well, I was going to say the right community, but I'll take credit for excellent driveway work." She laughed, the sound mixing with Murphy's, excited barking as he chased a butterfly through the tomato plants. Speaking of which, Derek wants to install solar panels on the garage roof. He says our energy efficiency could be optimized with the right photovoltaic array. "Do you want solar panels?" "I want whatever makes this place more sustainable and self-sufficient." Plus, Derek gets so excited about renewable energy projects that it seems cruel to say no. "Okay, then we'll install solar panels," though I'm drawing the line at the smart irrigation system he keeps suggesting. "Why?" "Because I like watering the garden with you every morning. Some things don't need to be automated." She stood up, brushing dirt off her hands, and looked at me with that expression I'd learned to recognize, the one that meant she was about to say something important. "You know what I realized yesterday?" "What?" "I haven't thought about my age in weeks. Not in the context of whether I'm too old for something, or whether people are judging me for making decisions at this stage of life, or whether I missed some window for happiness. Why do you think that is? Because I'm too busy living to worry about the timeline? Too busy building something real to wonder if I deserve it?" She paused, looking around at our yard, our house, our life. "Too busy being happy to question whether I'm allowed to be." Mrs. Hendricks appeared at the fence between our yards, as if summoned by the mention of happiness and timeline analysis. "Are you two planning to expand that garden into my territory?" she called out. "Because I've been thinking this neighborhood could use a community vegetable exchange program." "Sounds like a lot of coordination," I replied. "Oh, don't worry," she said with the confidence of someone who'd already planned the entire operation. "I've got it handled. Dolores is designing a distribution system. Patricia's writing up the legal framework. And Derek's creating some kind of app for tracking who grows what." Ilona and I looked at each other and started laughing. "What?" Mrs. Hendricks demanded. "Nothing," Ilona said. "We're just realizing that we've been assimilated into the most efficient neighborhood. Improvement collective in suburban history, obviously." Mrs. Hendricks replied, "I don't do things halfway." "Now, are you coming to Carmen's barbecue tonight?" She's making those ribs you like, and Derek promised to bring his new speaker system. Wouldn't miss it, I said, as Mrs. Hendricks headed back to her house to continue planning whatever community project she'd develop next. Ilona leaned against me, both of us looking at the garden we'd planted together. The house we'd made into a home, the driveway where everything started. Best home improvement project ever, she said, echoing her words from months ago. Definitely, I agreed, though I think we're just getting started. A year later, I was kneeling on that same driveway, checking the expansion joints for any signs of settling or cracking. The concrete had aged beautifully, no cracks, no shifting, level and solid as the day we'd poured it. It had become exactly what we'd hoped, a foundation built to last. Derek rode up on his bike, now wearing a Rosewood Community Tech Solutions t-shirt he'd had made for his growing neighborhood consulting business. Annual driveway inspection. He asked, grinning. Something like that, I said, standing up and brushing off my knees. You know, from an engineering perspective, what do you think makes some foundations last while others fail? Proper preparation, he said immediately. You can't just pour concrete over whatever's there and hope for the best. You have to clear out what's broken, address drainage issues, make sure the base is solid. Then you build something that can handle whatever weather comes. Through the front window, I could see Ilona in her kitchen, probably making her famous lemon bars for tonight's block party. Mrs. Hendricks was already setting up chairs in our backyard, like directing Carmen and her new boyfriend in the strategic placement of tables with the precision of a field general. I thought about what Derek had said about clearing out what's broken before building something new, about preparing properly for whatever weather comes, about the difference between quick fixes and foundations built to last. Ilona had done exactly that. She'd had the courage to clear out a marriage that wasn't working, to face the complicated mess her ex-husband had left behind, to risk trusting new people even when that felt dangerous. She'd prepared the ground for something better instead, of just patching over the cracks, and then she'd asked the bravest question I'd ever heard. Would you stay with me? Even if I'm 49? Not will you date me, or are you interested? Because she'd learned the difference between someone who's just passing through and someone who's planning to build something that lasts. The truth is, I was just fixing a driveway. That's all it was supposed to be. A simple home repair job. A few days of work, payment for services rendered, and then on to the next project. But sometimes the most important work happens accidentally. Sometimes fixing what's broken on the surface reveals something beautiful underneath. Sometimes a simple question asked with complete honesty changes everything. Sometimes the best foundations are built by people brave enough to ask for what they need, wise enough to recognize it when it shows up, and patient enough to let it cure properly. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you discover that home isn't a place you find. It's something you build, one day at a time, with someone who believes that the best projects are the ones designed to last forever. The driveway was perfect, but then again, it always had been. It was never really about the concrete. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.